Welcome back. This is our final official session for the Managing Stormwater Conference. There are other opportunities, as I've mentioned, to connect with speakers, sponsors, one-on-one video meetings. All those things can happen this afternoon or even through tomorrow. So if you haven't set up some of those conversations and those ways to connect with people, feel free to do that over the next hour or 2 hours. And I'd love to have you really take advantage of this platform we've created and developed for this conference. Next up is our closing keynote speaker, Justin Green. He's the Water Quality Division Administrator for Oregon DEQ. He's been in Oregon now with us since about 2018, so he's fairly new, but he has really jumped in and been a great asset and a great partner with DEQ, and certainly has been at the forefront of all of our events dealing with stormwater and other water-related issues. So there will be some time for Q&A. This is the one keynote session we're going to try to have some questions and answers. So in the chat feature, if you do have questions, feel free to post those, and Justin will be addressing some of those questions at the latter part of his presentation. With that, please welcome Justin Green. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Greg, and thank you, everybody, for having me here today. I want to thank Greg and Asia for organizing a great conference today and to the great accommodations here at Allied Video Productions. So I am going to cover a variety of information today. Like Greg said, there'll be an opportunity for Q&A at the end, so please use that chat function. I do tend to be direct in my conversation, in my presentations, and I go through a lot of information, so please don't hesitate to use that feature. So let's get to it. This slide, if you have seen me present in the last couple years or so, you've probably seen a slide like this before. This is just to remind folks of the leadership team structure we have at DEQ. As many of you are aware, in May of 2018, we did a reorganization to go back to media-specific administration, which you can see on the left side of the screen. Ali Mirzakhalili and myself actually started on the same day, April 30th of 2018. The only update really I wanted to provide on this organization is that we have a new central services director. That's Brian Bowling. You probably know him from DEQ's lab. And so he's now our central services administrator, and we have a new lab administrator, Lori Pillsbury, who has been with the lab for a number of years, and she is actually another Florida transplant, such as myself. So I won't go into the details of this leadership team org chart, as I think many of you have seen it before, but I just wanted to provide those updates and show everybody how we're organized and have this as a reference for you all to go back to. This is Water Quality's organization, the actual water quality program itself. There is some updates here. Once again, I think many of you have seen this slide before. This is actually kind of hot off the presses in our water pollution control facilities program. Dave Bellier was our manager for that program as well as our on-site program, but he retired last month. We're very happy for his service and very grateful for his service. And we now have Deb Mailander as our new manager in that section. So that's an update for the water quality program. On the right side, you can see how our regional offices are organized. We have an implementation administrator, Lori Annan, and our regional administrators report to her. Another kind of late-breaking news on this side of the chart is that Linda Hayes Gorman will be retiring this summer. She is our Eastern Region Director Administrator, in the Bend office. And she is retiring, and so Lori Annan will be the acting administrator in Eastern Region. And so once again, I'm not going to go through the nuts and bolts of this org chart, as I've done this before in many other presentations, but I wanted to provide this to you all as a reference so you know who to talk to when you have questions in the various program areas in water quality. So the first thing I want to talk about today is the DEQ water quality budget. This is the time of year going into a biennium legislative session next year where a lot of agencies are doing work on the budget. Even though that session isn't until February, March of next year, we are already working very hard on our various budget work for next biennium, as well as some unique budget asks that many of you all have probably heard about related to COVID and the economic impacts of that. So I wanted to talk about that first, the COVID impacts to our budget. As you may have seen in the news, there have been a couple requests coming from the governor's office, as well as the legislature, on how to cope with the impacts to the state budget when it comes to COVID. Obviously, there has been a reduced economic activity. There's been reduced lottery activity, which I will talk about in a little bit. Lottery fund reliance is something that the water quality program, specifically our lab, are very uniquely impacted by, so I'll talk a little bit about that. But as I said before, we've had requests from the governor's office as well as the legislature to work on what I'm calling, this is just my own term, kind of austerity measures as we go through the rest of this biennium, which is from now until I believe it is the end of June of next year, where we are really working on our, looking at if there is a reduction in general fund that's available or a reduction in lottery fund that's available to the agency, how we would cope with that. DEQ is not unique in this respect. A lot of agencies are getting asked to do this request, and so the request that we got is an 8.5 reduction in our biennium spending, which really equals a 17% reduction in our spending over the next year. So that's obviously a very dramatic number. So a lot of agencies are doing this work. Like I said, DEQ is not specific in that. Water quality is not specific in that. All of DEQ is looking at this. And so right now, we think that we can make this number, if we had to stop spending, we believe we can do that mostly through not filling vacancies. So hopefully there won't be a majorly dramatic impact if we had to show this kind of 17% reduction in the next year. Lottery fund is a little bit different. We don't really know exactly what the impacts of reduced lottery money is going to be. Obviously, lottery money isn't coming in at the rate that it has been, with a lot of businesses closed to the different lottery machines. So if you like I've been telling my friends and on social media, if you want to support water quality environmental work in Oregon, please play the lottery and lose. I know that I've been doing that quite a bit. I've been very successful at losing and trying to keep money coming into my program. But the lottery fund is something that we at Water Quality and in our water quality program, as well as our lab, do rely on a lot as a funding resource. There's other agencies that are very reliant on lottery fund and have had to make some very tough decisions, and we're very much thinking about those agencies and the tough decisions that they have to make. None of these conversations that we're having at DEQ or across state government are really easy. They're tough conversations because you're talking about really important work, and you're also talking about people's lives. So that really brings in the kind of dramatic impact that the economic impacts of COVID have, just beyond the human impacts, which are obviously are just very huge right now and kind of bewildering at times. So if anyone has any questions on that, please feel free once again to use the chat feature in this presentation to provide in those questions, and hopefully we can get to those at the end of my presentation. So that's COVID impacts. That's something that's very unique to what we're doing over the next year, looking at our budget the next year. But like I said, we have a biennium legislative session next year, a budget session, so we are working on our agency request budget. So we are doing just like we did last biennium, which we were very happy to get the large amount of support we did from the legislature as far as our budget and additional positions. We are looking at any new position requests that we'll be making for the next biennium. We definitely still see the need for additional positions. We laid that out in the 19 to 21 session. I think our original ARB, or agency request budget, had something like 50 to 60 positions, just to really, we weren't expecting to get those necessarily all at once, but we wanted to make sure that people knew that there was a need out there and that people understood that we needed additional resources to get that kind of work done, to get the work that we want to do as an agency. And so as we go into this upcoming budget session, we've seen some revenue forecasts. There's a lot of uncertainty and unknowns yet on what the budget will look like next year. So we still plan on, as of right now, to make the programmatic needs known. I think that's still important for us to let the legislature, let the public know, let you all know, what we're seeing as needs. And we'll really work on the economics and if there's funding available as we go into that session. And so we're looking at new positions, obviously looking a lot at our permitting work that we're doing, addressing the permit backlog we have, as well as looking at the TMDL program, our watershed management section. There's a lot of work that needs to get done in the TMDL program just to improve areas where we have impaired waters and due to some recent litigation and orders we have from courts on issuing certain TMDLs. One of the things we also have to do in a budget session is look at our reduction options. It's a standing request every budget session to every biennium for the legislature asks us to identify about 10% of our funding that if the legislature needed that money for some kind of emergency or to address some major gap, that they would have a package that they could grab and say, okay, here's the 10% from DEQ that we would take to meet this other need. And so we are working on that request. Once again, never an easy job to do because we're talking about really important work that we're doing across the state, and we're talking about positions, which are talking about people. The reduction options we put together, sometimes they're taken, sometimes they're not, but those are important considerations, important discussions that we're going through in water quality at DEQ generally, as are, like I said, other state agencies. The third thing that we look at when we're going into this biennium are fund shortfalls. So this is something that we don't talk publicly a ton about. It's not like we're hiding anything, but it's kind of getting into the weeds of our budget. But we have different fund types in water quality, as most agencies and programs in DEQ do. We have general fund, we have fee funds, we have lottery funds. So all these different funds are sources of money to fund the work that we're doing. And if that funding stays stagnant, stays at the same rate as it has historically, which is generally the case, obviously as inflation and things become more expensive, that money doesn't go as far as it has in the past. So we need to identify if funding were to stay stagnant, where we would have shortfalls in different fund types. And so oftentimes that involves, once again, looking at positions that we have in the program and how those positions are funded, and if we do not receive additional funding to cover those increased costs, how to address those shortfalls. So those are kind of the three big things that we look at going into the biennium, looking at our budget, working with the legislature. And so I thought it was important, hopefully this is informative for you all, but I thought it was important for you all to know what it is we work on when we're working on the budget and the timing of that. I believe that in July we'll be bringing our ARB, our DEQ ARB to the EQC in our meeting, which I believe is July 16th and 17th. Don't quote me on that. Please feel free to look that up on our website, but we will be talking about our agency request budget as an entirety during that EQC meeting. Finally, on the budget front, the permit fee increase. Many of you all are aware that we got, like I said, great support from the legislature in the 19 to 21 biennium. We got, I believe, don't have the exact number of positions in my head. I believe it was around 24. And some of those positions were funded by fees, and so permit fees. And so as part of the process that we go through, we do rulemaking to increase the fees. So those fees are in our rules. We've gone through that rulemaking process. We actually were scheduled to bring that final rulemaking to the EQC in their last meeting in May, but with COVID going on, a lot of uncertainty, that topic was tabled until our July EQC meeting. So we will be bringing, our plan right now is to bring the permit fee increase to cover the positions we got in the 19 to 21 budget to the EQC at their July meeting. So another reason to tune into that. Moving on to some of the higher priorities, I'm going to kind of talk about large, big picture things going on in water quality, and I'll get to some more stormwater specific items a little bit further on into my presentation. But obviously a big priority for DEQ and the water quality program is addressing our wastewater individual permit backlog. As many of you all may be aware, we have a number of permits that have expired. They've gone past their 5-year permit term, and they're just technically not expired. They're administratively continued, meaning those permits and those requirements stay in place going forward, but that permit is kind of stuck in time. And we have, I believe when I started, it was around 81 to 84% of our permits were administratively continued, meaning that they had passed their 5-year permit period and were kind of in the administrative continued stage. We made a lot of progress on that permit backlog, and that's what I want to give some updates on to you today. But that permit backlog was the subject of an independent consultant report. NWH did a report that's available on our website talking about our permitting program and some steps that we can take. We also had PG Environmental, which is another consulting company, in 2018 come in and do an assessment of our permit program to see what further refinements we can make. And so we're constantly working on our permit development program. It's something that we hope to take care of in about over a 10-year period. That's our internal time frame. It's also a litigation time frame that we have, where we want to seriously and dramatically reduce that backlog. The backlog to me is very much important. It's honestly, it's embarrassing embarrassing to me to have that many permits backlogged, but we're here to fix that, and I'm very excited about the progress that we're making, and so that's what I can show you some information about today. So like I said, our obligation and our internal goal is to address the backlog within 10 years. Right now, 88 of 331 permits are current, so we've brought down the backlog from approximately 81% of our permits being backlogged to 73% in just 2 years, which is a great success. This year, we've taken action on 28 permits. Last year, our number was around 20. The year before that, we took action on 32 permits. So we've taken 28 already this fiscal year, and we're using federal fiscal year to measure our performance. So we've already done 28 permits this federal fiscal year with a goal of 40 permits, which is a great success. And a couple of those permits are involving facilities that have our oldest administratively continued permits, permits that were issued in the late 80s or expired in the late 80s, which once again is something I'm not very proud of, obviously, that. I'm very proud of the success we're making and the progress we're making on addressing those permits. But to have something that's been administratively continued for so long is not the message and not the signal I want to be sending to Oregonians and to our stakeholders. And so we're very excited about the progress that we're making. Ultimately, the goal that we need to hit is about 65 to 70 permits a year to address the backlog, as well as keeping permits current as they're expiring. Obviously, we have permits that are current right now. They're in their 5-year permit period, and we want to make sure that we're renewing those timely so that we don't add to the backlog while we're addressing more historic permits that have been administratively continued. Our goal across all of water quality is to keep all of our permits current, individual permits, general permits, WPCF permits, everything. It's part of our responsibility to run a credible program to show Oregonians that we're committed to preserving and enhancing water quality across the state and working with our stakeholders and our permittees, because a lot of times folks are doing great environmental work. They want to do even more environmental work, but they're not in a position to because they would need a permit modification or a renewal to do that work. And so sometimes work is going on despite what DEQ is doing. And so I want to make sure that we're working with partners, we're working with our permittees, the folks that we regulate, to make sure that they can do what they need to get done to manage their discharges responsibly, which is something that we're all committed to doing. The next large thing going on at DEQ is our EDMS system. It's called Your DEQ Online is the branding for the system, but EDMS is our environmental data management system. I think that if you all have been seeing DEQ presenters in the last few years, you've probably heard about this system. This system is a complete transformation of the electronic resources that we use at DEQ. And it's not just what we use at DEQ in our internal processes. It's going to be a portal for permitted folks to interact with the agencies, submit permit applications, submit compliance reports, to be able to log in, just see how they're doing, what reports are coming up due. We're working with a vendor from New Jersey called Infotech, who has worked with 20 other states in implementing a system like this, 20 other states in their environmental fields, in coming up with this cloud-based portal where regulated entities can access it. It'll dictate a lot of the workflows that we do internally at DEQ, but it'll also be a resource for the public to go and look at electronic documents. Right now, we have a lot of paper documents. We do have an electronic system, but it's not very easy to access. It's not user-friendly. And so this new system will allow members of the public to go in and find information about environmental permits at DEQ on their own, which is great for transparency. It's important for the public to be able to see and know what's going on around them. But it's also going to be a great resource resource strain and lift from DEQ, because we have a lot of people that spend time responding to public records. And when you're dealing with paper documents, that makes that process even harder. And once again, as an environmental agency, going electronic is something that sends the right message to folks that we're being proactive and we're moving forward with technology and reducing our own environmental impacts in how we're doing business. And so the way that EDMS is being implemented is in kind of 3 waves. All of our program areas eventually, all of them except for maybe just a few, it's a small handful at DEQ, will be moving into EDMS. And we're doing that in 3 waves. And the first wave includes ironically enough, stormwater. And so in fall of 2020, the stormwater program will be into EDMS, and so we will be actually sending out a communication. If you're a permitted entity, you should be receiving a communication from DEQ in the next week or two on EDMS, letting you know this is what EDMS is, this is what our process is, so that we can start working with everybody on training on how to use the system and what expectations are across the state for EDMS. And so I provided the link to our DEQ page that provides information about EDMS, so I encourage you all to please go look at that. This is something that a lot of people are going to be using, and so it's really important that we spread the message at DEQ that this is coming, that we provide good education and training resources for folks, because a lot of people, like I said, are going to be using this system, and it's a really important step in how DEQ does its work and how we provide information across the state when it comes to DEQ programs and areas. So the next topic I want to discuss was federal activities. I think you probably have heard, in various different, keynotes or in the sessions earlier today about different things going on at the federal level. But I wanted to provide you all with an update on kind of the larger things that are getting a lot of my attention, as well as the attention of Jennifer Weigel, who's the Deputy Water Quality Administrator. I know a lot of you know her from her work. She's been with DEQ for, I believe, about 10 to 12 years or so. One of the big ones, obviously, we're looking at is Waters of the United States, the WOTUS rule that would go into effect June 22nd if there isn't any kind of litigation stay on that. I believe that there is a multi-state litigation hearing on June 18th regarding a stay for the WOTUS rule, but if a stay isn't granted, that would actually go into effect June 22nd. And essentially, at a very high level, I'm not going to get into the weeds of this. I think we could have, probably a 2-day conference and just talk about WOTUS and what the impacts would be to environmental regulatory schemes across the country. But really, what Waters of the United States, the new rule does, it changes the definition of what waters are regulated under the federal regulatory scheme. It doesn't mean that they couldn't get regulated by states, but states currently are relying on the federal regulatory scheme to implement certain environmental protections across their state. And so when we rely on the federal scheme, we're relying on the Clean Water Act. And so if the definition changes, that can create some holes in the regulatory scheme that we're seeing. And it also can create some issues for permittees who want to make sure that things that were previously permitted via a federal permit and then given a state 401 permit, water quality certification permit, that really covered all the holes, gave them did everything that they needed to make sure that they had all the permits and authorities that they needed to move forward with the project. But if we change the definition of what's needed for a federal permit, then there may be some issues with getting a 401 water quality certification. Is the discharge that project that normally would fall under the federal permit and then a 401 permit, there may be some new holes in that we have to address, and there's liability there that would want to get addressed. And so it's dramatic in that it changes its scheme. States can come in and fill that gap eventually, but it could kind of create a little bit of a ledge for a little bit as far as what we're covering as discharges in the state. So it's a very, very important rule. Another big, really dramatic proposed rule change is the 401 state water quality certification rulemaking that EPA is doing. And I'm not sure if it's kind of a daily update on if it's actually been published or not, a pre-publication version of the new 401 rule, the proposed 401 rule by EPA has been put on their website. And just speaking, once again, very broadly, very generally, the change to the 401 rule would decrease the state's ability to ensure water quality for activities permitted by the federal government. A lot of the justification for the 401 rulemaking was so that large projects such as the Keystone Pipeline or even in Oregon, something like Jordan Cove, wouldn't face the time lags and the regulatory obstacles, perceived regulatory obstacles that states are possibly imposing with the 401 process. And we take this rulemaking very seriously. It completely contradicts this EPA's message of supporting cooperative federalism. It's really getting states, it's reducing our ability to say what's best for Oregon and having our say in what happens on large federal projects. And then honestly, on a day-to-day basis, I think that this rule, the proposed rule changes will impact the smaller projects that aren't real environmental issues that we work with a variety of federal agencies and state agencies to get through. It's really going to create a lot of wrinkles and create a lot of work, something akin to throwing the baby out with the bathwater. But we believe that on large-scale infrastructure projects, something like Jordan Cove, the state absolutely needs to have a say in that process. And the proposed rule change will really diminish the state's role in that. It's something that we strongly object to. And so we've had comment letters. We've joined with other attorneys general across the state on comment letters voicing our objection to this, and it's something that we're very actively tracking and honestly very, very passionate about. Also in the federal activity realm, we have the Willamette Mercury total maximum daily load, that the TMDL for the Willamette Mercury. And that was something where we worked really closely with EPA for a number of years to develop. Obviously, the Willamette watershed is very large. It took a lot of time, a lot of coordination, and towards the last, kind of at the 5-yard line, EPA started raising questions about the work that we had done with them, and they ultimately did not accept our TMDL, and they proposed their own. They've proposed their own. They did a comment period for that, and they are currently working on responding to those comments and making any changes to that TMDL. So that is something, once again, that's in the works. We don't know exactly when that final EPA Mercury TMDL is going to be finalized and back out for implementation, but that's obviously something that we're working with EPA very closely on. The next topic, federal-wise, are PFAS. This is obviously something that I think a lot of you all have heard about in a variety of contexts. PFAS has come to light in the last decade or so as a contaminant of emerging concern. In fact, during the Safe Drinking Water Act, UCMR 3, I believe it was, UCMR is the Unregulated Contaminant Monitoring Rule, where EPA, under Safe Drinking Water Act authorities, identifies pollutants that are new, that new science is showing exist and may have health or environmental impacts, and they ask drinking water facilities to monitor for that. And that's something they did for PFAS, and they found that across the country, almost every state, if not every state, had some drinking water providers that had PFAS in their systems to all varying ranges. The Northeast and specifically Michigan have had some serious issues with PFAS being in groundwater. Oregon has, we did have a few source waters that showed PFAS there, but that was able to be addressed through either through treatment or through using different wells. So there's not a known PFAS problem in Oregon directly impacting people, but there's a lot that's not known about PFAS. And so we're working with OHA and a variety of other agencies to identify what the state needs to be doing on PFAS, but at the federal level, there's been a variety of comment requests as well as regulatory proposals in the Safe Drinking Water Act as well as in the cleanup program to address PFAS. And so that's something that the federal government's working on. That's something we're providing comment letters on how many PFAS. There's thousands of different compounds that fall into the PFAS category. And so we want to make sure that the federal regulatory scheme is consistent and addressing all of those. So talking about federal activities, the final kind of the wrap up of the federal topic is that we have Oregon's Environmental Protection Act, which specifically recognized that this federal administration has been making it a priority to change regulation and in a lot of instances decreasing regulation across the country. And we want to make sure in Oregon that we are doing everything we can to protect the environment, human health, and wildlife. And so there was Oregon's Environmental Protection Act that was passed, I believe, in 2018 that required the agency to look at federal activities identified as if it is in fact a rollback of environmental regulation, and if it is, to report to the EQC and make a conscious decision on what the state's going to do to address that rollback to make sure that we maintain those protections. So we regularly update the EQC on federal activities and potential federal rollbacks, and as those things happen, we would come up with proposals and bring those to the EQC to fill those gaps of the federal rollbacks. So that is something that we consistently monitor and report to the EQC on. So once again, I know that I'm covering a lot of information, a lot of topics. I do tend to talk fast, which I apologize for, but I do want to cover a lot of information. But once again, please use that chat feature to ask any questions or make any comments, and hopefully we'll have time today to respond to some of those comments and answer those questions. So stormwater. There's a lot going on in the stormwater permitting world right now. I believe you heard a little bit this morning about the 1200Z industrial stormwater general permit rulemaking that's currently taking place. That needs to be finalized by March 2021. We came out with our 1200Z permit a couple years ago that got a petition for reconsideration, eventually challenged in court, and as part of a settlement, we agreed to go through this rulemaking. The main topic of that rulemaking, though not exclusive, was whether numeric effluent limits were appropriate for the industrial permit. We've been working with PG Environmental, who I mentioned earlier. They're a consultant/contractor that works exclusively with the federal government. And so through a contract that they have with the EPA, they've been helping us with looking at emissions from the industrial stormwater sector in Oregon and whether numeric limits are appropriate. And so we have a rulemaking advisory committee meeting that's had several meetings already to discuss the findings of PG Environmental's work as well as proposals by DEQ, and so that work is ongoing. Another very important stormwater permit for Oregon and for DEQ is our 1200C construction stormwater general permit. Obviously, construction is an important thing in Oregon, especially with the housing issues that we have. And so that is a permit that we're absolutely going to keep current, and we need to make sure that we renew that by December 2020. We don't plan on doing that via rulemaking right now, but that is something that will be going out during this calendar year to make sure that that permit stays current. A big success for the stormwater permitting program has been the draft and proposed Oregon ODOT individual MS4 permit. That's a permit that I think was issued perhaps in the early 2000s. It was maybe 4 or 5 pages when it came out. It was one of the earlier MS4 permits in Oregon. We've been doing a lot of work with ODOT on that permit, a lot of improvements in that permitting process, a lot of documenting of the great work that the ODOT's been working. I really believe that this is an example of where ODOT has been doing a lot of things to be good environmental stewards and being responsible, despite the permit that they have. These are requirements that we haven't necessarily imposed on them, but they're doing that because they felt that responsibility. So we want to make sure that we're documenting that, but that we're also putting requirements in that permit to show people that this is a regulatory structure. These are the things that ODOT is going to be doing and needs to do to address their stormwater discharges from their MS4, which is obviously widespread given the large amount of roads that they manage in Oregon. And so where we are with that is that we went out for comment on that, and we are currently drafting our response to comments and any changes to the permit based on those comments. And so hopefully we'll have that back out as final, I would hope at some point this summer, early fall. Another big work effort that we have in our stormwater permitting program are our Phase 1 MS4 permits. Those are individual permits. So if you all recall that a couple years ago we issued our MS4 Phase 2 general permit that brought some new communities into the Phase 2 program. That is also the subject of litigation that is ongoing, but we are currently working on our Phase 1 MS4 individual permits. There's about 7 or 8 communities that have those individual permits, and we are working with them on the final touches of that. That's another permit that hopefully will be going out for a draft comment towards the end of the summer, early fall. Don't quote me on that. We really want to make sure that as we're updating these permits, we're focused on the quality of the permits, the understandability, the protectiveness, and the implementability of those permits. So we're going to make sure that we do what we need to do to make sure that those permits are protective, implementable, and defensible. But that's a lot of work that's going on right now in the stormwater permitting program. Stormwater compliance. So we've gotten a fair amount of inquiries across all the water quality programs and across all programs at DEQ regarding impacts due to COVID. Obviously, with people working remotely, teleworking, not being in the office, not being able to get together, there are impacts on facility operations, facility compliance reporting. And so I'd encourage you all to please look at the link that I've provided here. Go to that link and look at the wide variety of information we have regarding COVID. There's a specific section regarding compliance and enforcement when it comes to COVID. Obviously, we recognize these are unprecedented times. These are very unique times, and these are going to impact facility operations as well as facility compliance reporting and et cetera. We're not in a position generally to just waive requirements in situations like these. these requirements are in a permit. They're either federal or they're state permits that we can't just say, oh, we're not going to enforce those. But what we can do is identify where there is noncompliance with the permit, understand what the cause of that noncompliance was, and use enforcement discretion, which really means kind of penalty discretion, whether we need to pursue a penalty due to a noncompliance related to COVID, or whether the facility did everything they could in these kind of unprecedented times. We have to document the noncompliance as noncompliance, but whether we're going to pursue a penalty or not, which is generally a punitive thing to kind of say, to correct the behavior, to say, well, you did something wrong, so you need to feel a little, pay the price for that and not make that mistake again. I don't know what a facility, if it's really truly due to COVID, what they can do to remedy that or change their behavior next time, which obviously we hope there's not a next time. So that is important information for everyone to look at. I'm really proud about the work that we've done across the agency when it comes to compliance and enforcement. Kieran O'Donnell, who's the head of our enforcement office, he and I worked really closely on our approach, and it's been widely appreciated. I've seen a lot of comments nationally, a lot of summaries that folks have done about what's going on with COVID compliance and enforcement across the country, and Oregon's approach has widely been applauded as well, while at the same time some other approaches, including EPA, have been widely panned. So we're very happy to see positive responses, and hopefully you all, if you are regulated or working with a regulated entity, are having good conversations and a good back and forth with DEQ on any compliance issues. Stormwater enforcement, I'm not sure how much we broadcast this, but at DEQ, stormwater is one of our highest enforcement areas. It has some of the highest number of cases come out of our stormwater program. And so I wanted to highlight that for folks. And as many of you all have may be aware, and when you've heard me talk before, I really see, I see noncompliance as a failure on all of our parts. We want to make sure that the permits that we issue are protective and implementable and enforceable. But if we're allowing environmental impacts to happen, then we're not doing what we need to be doing. Our job as an agency is to protect and enhance the environment. And so I want to be making sure that we're working with you all, providing information, laying out expectations, so you all understand what we expect to see when we go out and do inspections, when we review compliance reports, so that you can stay in compliance, mitigate any environmental impacts you all may be having, and be focused on your business and focused on the environmental work that you're doing, rather than dealing with enforcement actions. So let's continue to have that dialogue. I'm very glad to work with Greg, funnel things through him if you want to, or through to me directly, or the program directly, to talk about any questions you have so that we can help stay in compliance and do the best for Oregon's environment. So that's the kind of compliance assistance and outreach topic that is important to me. Once again, as we talk about resources, that can be something that falls by the wayside as budget constraints, and if we don't have the positions available to do that. But it's something that we're committed to and that we're passionate about. So let's have that dialogue about what we can do to work together to keep folks in compliance and, like I said, do the best by Oregon's environment. So priorities for DEQ's water quality program. We have a lot of stuff going on, and so I wanted to kind of lay out what the big ticket items are in water quality. So obviously permit development, we talked about that earlier. Addressing the permit backlog and the administratively continued permits we have are a huge priority for DEQ. It's the expectation by the legislature, by Oregonians, and by DEQ that we address that, and so that's a big priority for us. Our budget, obviously right now, especially with COVID and with the biennium coming up, that it's really important, the wide variety of budget work that we're doing, to make sure that we're in a position to do the work that we need to do, as well as addressing changing economic times. Another big priority of our temperature TMDLs. I'm not sure how many of you all are aware, but there was a recent court decision. This litigation was going on for around a decade regarding temperature TMDLs, but in a nutshell, let's grab some water real quick. We have about 7 or 8 temperature TMDLs that we have to issue in a short period of time. And so right now we're doing work internally to figure out what that process is. So it's going to be kind of an assembly line-like process to get these TMDLs done and have them quality. So we're doing that internal work to figure out what process we're going to use. So it's a huge priority for us. And finally, EDMS. I mentioned EDMS. It's a very large project, huge priority for DEQ, taking up a lot of resources right now. but it's really going to revolutionize the way we do work. So we're really excited about that. And with that, that's the end of my prepared slides. Excuse me, and hopefully we have some questions.
Yeah, Justin, there are some questions here. One question, will DEQ be loading up historic records onto the long overdue EDMS?
That is our plan. We are going through a process called data migration, where we're looking at historic data that we have in our existing legacy systems and translating that to go into our new systems. That's actually one of the most time-consuming aspects of a project like this. I've worked on several technology projects like this in my career. I worked on quite a few of them in Florida, and data migration is always tricky because you're looking at historic data stored in a different format, maybe at different fields, and you're trying to translate that into a new system. And so that can get a little tricky, but that is our goal, is to have that historic information available in the new system.
Next question. How will DEQ provide technical assistance for industrial permit holders to understand and comply with all of the upcoming changes to the 1200Z?
That's a great question. That's something that I would turn back on you all. What is the best way for us to do that? If you have forums or mediums that you think would work best for you all, please let us know. Obviously, we're focusing on a lot of the work that we're doing for the rulemaking right now, but we recognize that there's going to be an education curve there. And so we want to try to find forums such as this to go talk to people. I know we had several DEQ staff in several of the sessions today, but really I could see webinars happening, be it COVID or not, doing webinars to talk about the permit, but I'd really be curious on what would work for you all. So please forward that feedback to me.
Another question. Will 1200Z monitoring waivers that would have expired in 2022 expire in 2021 once the new permit comes online?
Ooh, that's a good question. That is a level of detail that I do not know off the top of my head, but I will make sure I get that to the program area, and I'll work with Greg to get that information back to you. That's a great question.
Here's one comment, and you may want to touch on this. A workshop or training would be very helpful to understand and comply with changes. And of course, NEBC is happy to be a conduit there.
Great plug. And so that's just a comment that people would like to see these trainings and have that as a resource for education. Is that right?
And I'm not tracking with this question, but similar question for NECs established under the current permit. Am I misreading? Maybe it didn't quite get...
Maybe can you repeat that one, Greg?
Well, I think it's a similar question for NECs established under the current permit.
Okay, yeah. That's, once again, it's a kind of technical question that I don't have the immediate answer for, but we'll make sure that we get back to you on that one.
Another. Can you go into any detail on the changes in ODOT's MS4 permit? ODOT goes to great effort to disturb as much soil along highways as it can with herbicides, mechanical means, etc., causing sediments, lubricants, and metals to flow directly into waterways. Any changes in the works on ODOT's BMP requirements?
Well, since we're in the drafting permit, the response to comments period right now, I don't want to go into kind of too much of the details. I kind of have to let the draft permit, which is out there and available publicly, to kind of speak for itself. But that is really one of the goals that we wanted one of the goals with the renewal of the permit was to really codify that and show those requirements, show what the BMPs are. I know that ODOT has a BMP toolbox or toolkit that they use that they follow when they're doing various projects, and so we want to make sure that we're documenting those and that the public can see those so that people have understanding of what ODOT does in their work. So that's one of the overarching goals of the permit. But as we're kind of where we are in the permitting process, I kind of need to let that permit speak for itself until it kind of goes out as our final permit.
Another question here in a comment. Thank you for updating the org charts for DEQ and water quality. Are there plans for an agency quality assurance officer? Since Scott, Hodson retired, there has been a gap.
I'm not aware, the quality assurance officer is actually in our lab, so I wouldn't want to speak for our lab administrator. So I don't have any specific knowledge as far as how that position and that work is transitioning. I know that we have someone that is helping with some of those. I actually got an email yesterday as I think, because I believe that we're updating our quality assurance program plan or our plan sometime in the near future. So we have folks right now kind of pitching in and helping fill some of the gaps that Scott's departure has left. So that is something that we're currently working through. Like I said earlier when we were talking about our budget, vacancies are a source of savings if we do need to do kind of these self-termed austerity measures over the next year. Leaving those vacancies open is a great way for us to mitigate some of the budget impacts, but we want to make sure that we're making good decisions. So I appreciate that feedback and making me aware how important that position is to you.
I should say I believe Kathy Jacobson's on your staff. She's trying to answer some of these questions in real time, so shout out to
Great.
Kathy for doing that in real time.
Thank you, Kathy.
And here's a comment too. DEQ's hazardous waste training is an excellent model for outreach to smaller permittees. So just a little comment there.
No, that's really great to know. I really appreciate that. It's great to hear the thing that DEQ has products that are working for folks, and where we have successes elsewhere in the agency, it's great to emulate that. So I will definitely pass that on to the Stormwater program to make sure that they take a look at that. And honestly, I will look at other program areas as well, because if we have something that's really working for people, that's successful, that's a great model to follow. So thank you for that.
If there will be hiring freezes or staff cuts, what would permittees expect regarding inspections? Will the current or expected staff be able to get out to a similar number of sites?
That's a great question. That is something that we have to make those decisions as we're going through the budget work that we're doing. We want to make sure. I mean, one of the things that I've seen just coming in relatively new these last 2 years, I can kind of see historically where we've that kind of robbing Peter to pay Paul kind of thing where, okay, this is a big priority, so let's put all of our resources to that, and then something gets left behind, which is one of the reasons why we're kind of in the permitting issue that we're having right now. So we really are working, Jennifer Weigel and I are working really hard together to make sure that that if we do have, decreasing resource levels, that it's kind of, it's I wouldn't want to say it's uniform across all program areas, but that we're not completely neglecting one area. Simply, if we have less people, that's going to mean they can't get out as often. But we want to make sure that we're making these decisions intelligently, so that folks that are used to having those interactions with DEQ aren't all of a sudden not seeing people in the field. That's something that's not acceptable to me. It's something that we're talking about at DEQ across all program areas, and specifically we're talking about this in water quality, about what really is our core work. And to me, the compliance work that we do is really important core work. You think about a regulatory scheme, you think permits and compliance and enforcement. Those are kind of the two big things that you do, kind of in a vacuum, once again, very high level. And so it's important to me that we still have that presence in the field and out there, regardless of what's going on budgetarily. And so a lot of the things that I've been working on and working with our regional administrators, our staff, and our program managers is how do we come up with a tangible, credible, something you can actually read and see, compliance monitoring strategy for what our priorities are in doing compliance work across the state. And so it's important for us to show that to folks, that we're using the resources that we do have responsibly, that we're meeting our regulatory goals, our oversight goals, and that we're interacting with our permittees to provide information and relay what our expectations are. So it's a long way of saying we can't really hold anything harmless if there's significant budget impacts. But we want to make sure that we have that we're meeting that core work that is the compliance work that we do. Great
Justin,
question.
It looks like we have at least one more question here. Do you foresee any delays to the expected fall 2020 implementation of EDMS for 1200Z reporting due to a COVID DEQ workplace disruptions, or is this still on schedule?
It is still on schedule. I don't see any changes to the timeline. I've been very impressed by our IT staff in getting so many people almost kind of overnight working remotely and from home. And I'm even more impressed by the work that our staff have been doing from home. We have been just as productive, if even not more productive, during this time in doing our work. We're working remotely. We're working with the EDMS vendor. We're working in program areas to make sure that we're meeting the timelines that we need to for EDMS. So I don't expect COVID to be a reason for any kind of slipping of those timeframes. Great question.
I think that looks like the questions that have come in. So any additional final closing thoughts?
Well, I just want to say once again, thank you everybody for attending the conference today. There's just a lot of information that was relayed and provided throughout all the different sessions. I was just going through the agenda, and one of the great things about this format is that, Greg and I were talking about this earlier, is that now you can go see, once you've registered for this, these materials will be online. You can go see all the different tracks and different sessions you may have missed out on. So it's great to see the stormwater community and the environmental community that came to the conference to have these discussions today. I really appreciate the ability to come and talk to you about what our priorities are. Once again, I just really encourage you all to reach out to me, reach out to DEQ, use the names and the information in my presentation to have conversations with folks on what you see that we could be doing better as an agency, what your needs are to be successful in what you're doing. Because it's obvious that we all care a lot about Oregon's environment, and we want to do everything we can to use the resources that we have to enhance and protect water quality. And I thank you all for all the work that you're doing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Justin, for joining us today. Thank you, the participants, those of you that are out there that stuck with us through the end of the day. You really helped make this event a success, and we believe it has been a success. We can get a lot of comments directly and indirectly about what a great event we were able to put on. But and a lot of that is I want to thank Allied Video. I think Justin mentioned that. Allied Video is the company based here in Salem, Oregon that is producing these sort of keynote speaking opportunities right here. So they did a fantastic job to really put some polish on this conference. Also, don't forget, the event is not over. There are happy hours. I know Anchor QEA has a happy hour immediately following this session. There are meetups. There's opportunities to engage in one-on-one chat sessions, demos, all those things today and tomorrow. So take an opportunity to look at those. Don't forget, if you are on those sessions, you might want to hit the mute button. I know sometimes the functionality of this allows people to kind of talk when they maybe shouldn't be talking, so kind of be cognizant of that if you're going to jump on some of these. All these sessions will be live, I believe, tomorrow, so you'll have an opportunity to jump back in, look at the keynote sessions, look at the breakout sessions, and really, again, as Justin really was the best commercial for this. He said, go in there and consume all the content that's there for your taking, if you will. Watch for NEBC events coming up this summer and this fall. We have a PFAS session that we're going to do from Boise, and that was going to be in Boise. Now that it's going to be virtual, everyone that has an interest in what's going on with PFAS, particularly in state of Idaho, can jump on that session. And we have a lot of other conferences coming up, so watch for more information. And lastly, thank you sponsors and exhibitors for making this event happen with your financial support. And I guess there is one more lastly, if there's two lastlies. We'll have a survey coming out. We would love for you to take the time to fill out that survey. Give us some feedback on this so we can make these events better, because it looks like this is what we're going to be doing for the balance of the year. We're going to probably have some incentives, an iPad donation, something of that effect. So with that, thank you for joining us today, and thank you for being a part of this great conference.